There are a collection of giveaways, things about us that give away what we're doing here, what our purpose is, why we exist. And one of those things is that we are aware of time. We are aware of time in a way that no other creature is. We don't just feel hunger and eat. We don't just feel tired and sleep. We understand time as this almost separate realm. We understand what the future is. We understand what the past is. We are bound to time. We are time binders. And that's one giveaway. The second one is that we have complex language. Our language is meant to slice the world up and figure out what it is and talk about it and get as many things as possible worded. It's like taking a pie and just having the pie there. Most other creatures, all other creatures, just have a pie. But we have a pie that's cut up and divided. We have pieces that go to specific people. We are aware of mathematics. Mathematics is a language. It's a very specific and accurate language. And math is in and of itself a complete, almost separate universe that does a very, very good job of talking about reality. If there's 3 sticks on the ground, you count them 1, 2, 3. You add 2 more, now you have 5. We pulled math out of the universe. It was already there. And when we discovered math, just like when we discovered language, it was like putting a key into a door and turning it and walking through. Math has verified its validity in all the things that we've done with it. There are so many accuracies in math, and it's gone from 3 plus 2 equals 5 to extremely complicated equations. And each equation is a description. You have descriptions of gravity. You have descriptions of atoms. You have descriptions of velocity. These giveaways, among many others, tell you directly that human beings are here to figure out how it was done. We're all here to figure out how this happened. And when we do figure that out, we will be aware of the whole grand scheme. That is our purpose. That's why we're here. Everybody is their own separate little nerve ending on a planet that peoples. One of the symptoms of Earth as it is people. This is the sort of place that grows people in the same way that an apple tree is the sort of thing that grows apples. And Earth is just this little spot, man, just this tiny little end of a pin where everything is very, very different. Travel all over space, all over the place, and you'll find all kinds of cool things, all kinds of just amazing, beautiful things, but you will not find anything like Earth. Earth is a unbelievably finely tuned system of balances. Unbelievably finely tuned. And this planet hugs. It hugs us down. It hugs all the gases and the oxygen and the CO2 and the argon and the helium down and keeps it here. And anywhere we go outside of Earth, we have to recreate Earth's conditions to stay alive, obviously. But here on this planet lies the keys to the entire universe. Because Earth is a hyper example of what there is. Earth is a highly, highly complex, very, very high resolution version of everything else. And once we discovered language, we discovered math, and we started writing things down, and we started teaching, suddenly we realized that there are people who seem to be born to push the fast forward button for humanity. And these people can't fully explain why. Like Nikola Tesla, the guy who just invented so much, knew electricity so well and how it operated that sometimes when he had visions of devices, he couldn't tell if they were somehow being given to him. He couldn't tell the difference between the images in his mind and the world outside of him. They were that vivid. He knew how an electric motor would run. He knew how alternating current would operate intuitively. In other words, he felt how electricity operates. And then later, his feeling was verified through mathematics and experimentation. And there are people like that all over this planet who understand things first intuitively, and they do not have the words or the means to put any of it into practice, but they understand a specific function or various functions of themselves or of this planet. And we didn't know that. I mean, our version of humanity in the past centuries was just so low resolution. And I personally believe that the different races of Earth are like pieces of a puzzle. And if you can get it to work, if you can get it right, if you can have a place where everybody of all the races, of all the different people are together in a cohesive fashion, then you are going to have the cutting edge of cutting edges. You will be the civilization who is the one who is the center of history. And that's a multi-century process because obviously when human beings were in their various regions, when we first came across people who looked different, your first reaction is obviously to sort of exploit the situation or be fearful. But over time, once you realize that, yes, we're all human, and yes, we're all here, and we're all doing the same thing, we want the same things, and you get together, you find out things that you would not have otherwise known. And the United States is a very, very good example of a, I guess you would call it, multicultural society that's not only not collapsing, but it's actually pulling further and further ahead of the world. This is where culture and the best of the best is manufactured. This is where it's happening. And other societies who insist on staying homogenous, they will fall by the wayside. And other civilizations that try to force a multicultural situation are going to have a hard time, because the United States is extremely good at assimilating people, because there's something about the core of the United States and its universally understood mission that people can identify with. Most people think to themselves, they think, if I just had a chance to carve out a piece of this world for myself and use my own abilities to work and make things happen, then I'll do it. And I'll show you that I can do it. And it's that foundation that brings people here. And it's that foundation that allows us to grow in so many different directions. But it takes time. And one vulnerability the United States will always have is those who wish to exploit the differences that we have are going to, and it's honestly up to us to not take that bait, because we're trying to do something over here, you know. And we will. We will. We have the fortune of having the Roman Empire and the Byzantines and other empires to learn from. Those people back then, they were winging it, you know. And we sort of are too, but at least we have that. So each of us has our immediate proximity. The closer you get to you, to me, the more influence you have. And obviously the internet extends out your proximity, but it's to a lesser degree. Your immediate proximity is your responsibility. That's yours. And it's going to act on you. It's going to do everything that it can to you. And some people, I've noticed this, learn very, very, very well through the experiences of other people and people around them. Some people pick that up very, very quick and almost automatically incorporate it into their own lives. I mean, we all have this base amount that we sort of automatically learn, but some people take it a step further. Some people just have something about them that allows experience to really embed into them. And other people will go through their own life experiences and not take the things out of their experiences that move them forward. There's so many different degrees of intelligence, of talent and ability. And it's so complicated, it's hard to say exactly the cause or how to cultivate such a thing, because at the end of the day, you really can't. It's our subjective experience and our objective experience together that makes what we call the truth. If you're somebody who is trying to take your subjective experience and sort of stretch that out over everything and call that the truth, then you will be wrong over and over and over again. Because you cannot ignore the objective. You can't. If you ignore the objective and put special focus on your subjective experience, you should try something. You should go out today and lie 100% of the time. Don't say a single true word. If it's day, say it's night. And just go talk to people. When people hear you talking like that, they will either think that you're an absolute psychopath, that something is genuinely wrong with you, or they'll realize that you're playing some kind of game. You're doing something on purpose, because there's no way that that's how you actually are. Try that. 100% of what you say is not true. See how that goes. It won't be long before you're just like, okay, I cannot keep this up. It doesn't work. Then you dial it back to 90%, then 75, then 50. Half of what you say is true. A quarter of what you say is true. See how it works. See what it does. This is the beauty of being a human being. If you want to find out how things work, you can find out. But you already know. You don't really need to experiment to find out. You have to call day day, and you have to call night night. If you feel like it's day when it's night out, it's not. So you have to marry your subjective experience to the objective outside world and inside world, to be honest. Those two things cannot be separated, because we are where the subjective and objective meet. We are the focal point. We're where those two things cause friction against each other. And that friction is our experience. And if you go out there and try to say only true things, which most people do, you won't notice anything at all. Everything will be just fine, because it's congruent. Nobody will reward you. Nobody will say thank you for telling the truth when you say it's daytime and it's day out, because that's how people at their core understand that that's how you're supposed to operate. And to be perfectly frank, reality doesn't like being misrepresented. And that sounds a little spooky, it sounds a little mystical, but you can call it whatever you want. It does not like being misrepresented. It just doesn't. It likes you accurately describing things, and not only accurately describing them, but in a beautiful way, or an artistic way, or in some way that, I don't want to say is complimentary, but is just a little more. Because you have to remember, we are reality as well. There is nothing different or distinct or separate between you, me, and the rest of reality itself. Nothing. And we're in a weird time now where I'm noticing that there's some ideas that have been bouncing around that are just absolute, pure regression. And this is what I mean when I say we are learning how to handle the internet, because all of the sudden the population is exposed to the ideas of people who normally would try to give their ideas to an audience around them, and those ideas would be soundly put to rest. But with the internet, everybody is exposed to everybody's terrible ideas, and some of them catch steam. Some of them take a bit of a shape, but at the bottom of that glass is regression. And I have to imagine that even when I say that, you understand what I mean. A bad idea is something that, when you put into practice, causes suffering, where otherwise there would be none. A bad idea is cutting off your hand because you identify as an amputee. That idea would get no traction But there are things like that. But it feels like we're starting to maybe sober up. At least it seems. It seems like society, I don't know if you want to call it progress, but it moves in a certain direction for maybe 2 generations, 20 to 40 years. And then the changes that happen during that time are reviewed. And during that review, the things that are truly good are kept. But the things that are clearly bad they're cut out. And we're sort of right now in the cutting phase. We're also in the situation where a lot of good ideas have been put out there. A lot of really good things have been said by a lot of really smart people. So a lot of the really big bites out of the intellectual and philosophical and scientific pie have been taken. And there isn't much left. There's a bunch of crumbs all around. So you really have to say something good. Do something good to really have a home run, so to speak. Which seems to have given way to a lot of people coming up with some very terrible ideas and calling it progress. But it's not. And that's not just subjectively true, it's objectively true. For one, there are 2 genders. There's male and female. Anything beyond that is a psychological manifestation, not a biological manifestation. It's an invention. It's something that is trying to be pressed upon society rather than having come out of it organically. And you could ask why. You could probably trace it back somewhere to someone. But yes, the understanding that there's 2 genders is something that you close the book on and move on. If you're fixated on splintering that apart and investigating it, you are literally intellectually regressing. As the species here who are trying to figure out what this is, what reality is, what human beings are, why we're here, we need not get stuck on this set of opposites that work together. It's interesting, years and years ago, centuries ago, hundreds of years ago, human beings had no idea what that beating thing was in their chests. They just felt this pump. And they could breathe in and feel these things expand inside of them and their chest would puff out. And then they would get hit in the arm and break their arm and this white thing would stick out that's hard and this red stuff would come out. And we had no idea what was inside of us. We had no idea what our brains looked like. We had no idea we had a heart that pumped blood. We didn't know we had lungs to breathe air. We didn't know what our kidneys did. We didn't know kidneys existed. We didn't know what our digestive system looked like. It's pitch black inside of us. There is no light at all inside of us. And the only ones who saw what was inside of us was the very, very rare, obscure doctor or the one in battle. See, it's a strange thing. We are born not only into a universe that we have to learn, but we are born into an organism that we have to learn. We have to actually learn our parts and how they go together and what they do. If we lost everything that we've learned so far and we had to start over, and you had a child, you would have to tell them and teach them. And there may be a time where everything is truly lost and humanity has to start all over again. And we're back to not knowing. We're back to not knowing that washing your hands prevents infection. That's one of those things that's available that we just didn't know about. And there's going to be a lot more things like that. There are some people who are extremely persuasive. And it's honestly those people that I end up probably respecting more than anybody else. It's the persuasive people. Because in order to persuade me, you have to know what you're talking about. And you have to talk about it like you know what you're talking about. Politics is in an interesting state. Honestly, I think the United States will be just fine. I think we're just fine, but you hear it all the time, people yearning for authenticity or sincerity. Now, why do we want that? What is it about somebody saying words that are congruent with their subjective experience and their objective experience? What is it about that we want? Why do we want somebody who doesn't lie 100% of the time or 50% of the time or even 1% of the time? Why do we want people who accurately represent reality with the words they use? There is something in us that feels put together properly when we hear somebody saying something that we know to be true. And the way the internet is right now, with the way social media is, we can get a sense of public sentiment on just about anything very, very quickly. If you want to know what people think, you can find out in a way that we've never been able to find out before. Opinions are able to be shaped in a way like never, ever before. And we are literally figuring out how that works right now. And it consumes so much of our bandwidth that sometimes we don't think about other potentially more important things, which is completely understandable. A human life, the dramatics of a human life have such a powerful gravity that we will forget why we're here. And we will feel in our bones that the reason we are here is tied to those dramatic things. It effectively replaces every bit of our curiosity. And I've been guilty of this so many times. There's been times where I sat down and just meditated, or whatever you want to call it, and I experienced this reality, this world, in its most pure and objective form as humanly possible. I could feel through and through on an atomic level what and who I was in my relationship to all things, but within weeks I had completely forgotten about it, and I was only aware of the various dramatic threads going on in my life, and I had forgotten about that state and those revelations therein. It's almost like an up and down and a left and a right. Like over time, I would get pulled into the dramatics of life. into the true dramatics of life. And then, after a while, I would think to myself, I need to take a step back now and experience the objective again, which is almost a form of detachment. It's almost like a psychological cleansing in a way. And I would go back and forth over months at a time. I would pull out, become detached, completely untethered. Of course, while my tethers all still existed, and then I would just dive right back in. It's almost like a wave. It's an up and a down with a crest and a trough. But I think there are some times, I know there are people who never have that moment or period of detachment, of raw objectivity, because looking at this world in a purely objective state, suddenly everything is beautiful. Suddenly everything is marvelous. The very fact of your existence is an astounding fact, and the cup sitting next to you looks like the hand of God. Nothing is more brilliant than the mundane when you're in an enlightened state. But somebody who stays in that state, somebody who wants to hold on to that forever, will find as much difficulty as somebody who never has it in the first place. It will always go back to that. It will always go back to two opposites that comprise a whole. And that's one of the giveaways. One of the best descriptions I heard of God was from Enoch, in the book of Enoch. He said God had the body of a man, but from the shoulders up, it was just light. His head was this radiating, brilliant light. And he said that was the light that animated the universe, that animated reality. And he said it was so bright that you had to look down, you had to look away. But it didn't hurt. Almost like our situation with the sun, except it hurts. But the Book of Enoch is one of the more interesting reads. I highly recommend that to anybody who hasn't read it. It's only like 75 pages, but it's a very vivid description of pre-Jesus Earth. And it's not your typical Bible dialect. It's very direct, and it's the sort of verbiage that can't be interpreted any other way. It's very straightforward with, a very clear story, and it's fascinating. But it reminds me of the human situation, the part divine, part animal situation. That's probably one of my favorite dichotomies. Is the classic soul versus flesh, the intellect versus emotion, the animal versus the sentient, the moral versus the immoral, and the right versus wrong, and the interpreter that grows out of those dichotomies in action, working together. When I was younger, I was more animal. I was an athlete. I got in a lot of fights. I was quick to anger. And I just didn't have the mental or psychological ability to say what I needed to say to resolve situations. It just wasn't there. It didn't exist. And it was a completely different experience. I experienced the world extremely differently back then. And I remember what it felt like. It felt like beyond my immediate proximity, nothing else existed. as far as I was concerned, outside of where I was, there was nothing else. This was all that was real. It was very in the moment, very instinctual. And I did not have the, I guess you could say, intellectual balance to give depth to the world. And now I see both of those things at the same time. I see how things are both serious and unserious. I see how nothing is actually, ultimately, finally, truly serious. And at the same time, it's serious. Doesn't make sense, but it does. I see how there is literally humor in everything. And you have to choose to not see it in order to take something seriously. You ever find yourself in that situation where you see the funny, it's always there. I see the serious, it's always there. I see the interpretation that involves depth, the one that involves wisdom, the one that involves not caring. There's so many interpretations per event. And there's a thing too, if you decided to do that experiment where you lied 100% of the time, and you did that Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, by the end of that week, you will have taken a different direction. You will have caused a fork. You will have started momentum in a certain direction. And if you kept doing that week after week, month after month, you will have built momentum in a certain direction that you otherwise would not have done. Lying is one of those things that can very, very quickly alter your state of affairs by doing it enough. In the same way that people don't like you misrepresenting reality, reality does not like being misrepresented. And karma, the word karma literally translates to your doing. Karma is not a natural law that punishes and rewards. It is your doing. So when somebody says that's your karma, they're saying that's your doing. If I were a god, or the god, and I created children, humans, and I was up there, I was being God, it seems like a very miraculous situation to go down there in the form of a man and personally sacrifice myself and personally bear the sins of all humans, past, present, and future, and bear their suffering so that they may be forgiven. And the thing that humans were forgiven for was, as Satan, you could call him, the devil, whatever you want to call him, as he looked down upon humanity after humanity was known to be on earth. For the first time, these angels, soldiers, whatever you want to call them, looked down on earth and thought to themselves, this is the first time that there's been something under us. We've been under God this entire time. And to those people down there, we would look very much like gods. We could be gods. So they did. They went down there. And humanity treated them as gods, revered them, worshipped them all over the earth. And that sin is what humanity needed to be forgiven for. And that tendency in man to worship something as a God that isn't is forever in us. Once it was exposed, it's forever known. So you're also forgiven for the future. So God had a human nervous system on that cross, experiencing everybody's suffering, everybody's sin, not only to forgive you, but so that he can say, look, I didn't just make you and throw you down there on earth to experience this life that can be hard, but I've personally experienced it myself. I know it. There's nobody who knows your suffering more intimately than I do. And yeah, it blows my mind, man. Like, he didn't have to do that. You know? He didn't have to do that at all. In fact, that seems like a very unlikely thing to do.